Welcome to Job Bridges Japanese Language Training Center. We provide an online tutorial for people who aspires to work in Japan. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to keep you updated on our lessons to help you master Japanese language in no time.
Konnichiwa minasan! In this video, we'll be discussing Lesson 27. Now, Lesson 27 will be divided into two parts. Part 1 and Part 2, of course. Because I want you to focus first in the first part with the potential verbs. Alright? I don't want to put too much load into you, and I want you to focus and be acquainted with certain topics before you go on to the next. So let's start with Lesson 27, Part 1. So for Lesson 27, we'll be discussing about potential verbs. So what are potential verbs? So potential verbs, as you've learned from Lesson 18, noun or verb dictionary form plus koto ga dekimasu, as explained again in Lesson 18, is a form of expressing potentiality or a potential. Lesson 27 is another form, or this is another form. So, if you could still remember, we do have three kinds of verbs, alright? Or verbs are grouped into three kinds. Okay, the group 1, group 2, and group 3. Group 1 verbs, those are verbs that has I ending before the mass form, while group 2 verbs are those that ends in the A line before the mass form, while the group 3 verbs are the verbs which is a noun and then shimasu are added, so they become a verb, and of course kimasu. So how do we translate or transform verbs from their mass form into these potential verbs? Now, we have a polite form and a plain form. So let's start off with group 1 verb. For example, we have here kakimasu. Again, kakimasu, or to write. Now, to change this or to transform this into a potential verb, first in the polite form, you change the ki and then change it into its ke or e equivalent. Change the e line into the a line counterpart before the mass form. For example, kakimasu. Okay, the sound before the mass is ki, then change it into its e counterpart, which is ke. So kakimasu, to be a potential form or to be a potential verb in its polite form, will be kakemasu, which means can write. Now, to change it into its plain form, you just have to remove the ru from kakemasu, or you have to remove the mas from kakemasu and change it to ru, and it will be kakeru, which also means can write. Kakimasu, to write, and then the potentiality or the potential verb or the polite form is kakemasu, which means can write. And if you want to make it a plain form, you just have to remove the mas and add ru, which makes it into kakeru, which also means to write. Another example, kaimasu, to buy. Again, kaimasu, to buy. Now, in kaimasu, the sound before the mas is e. Now, you have to change the e into its e counterpart, which is e. So, kaimasu, to be a potential verb in a polite form, will be kaimasu. Again, kaimasu or kaimasu, which translates into can buy. Now, if you want to change it into its polite form, you just have to remove the mas, then add ru, which turns it into kairu, or again, can buy. Again, kaimasu, to buy, to become a potential verb, or when it is a potential verb in a polite form, it is kaemasu. Now, in a plain form, kairu. Now, can you think of other group 1 verbs that you can transform into a potential verb? How about to swim, oyogimasu? Again, to swim, oyogimasu. What do you think is the potential form of oyogimasu in the polite form? Very good. It's oyogemasu, which means to swim. How about in its plain form? Right, oyogeru. Very good. Now, let's move on to group 2 verbs, or verbs which ends in E-line or A-line, then the mass form. For example, we have here tabemasu, to eat. Now, to become a potential verb, okay, you have to remove the mass in its mass form, then add raremasu to become a polite form. Again, remove the mass from group 2 verbs, then add raremasu to become a potential verb in the polite form. So, tabemasu, potential verb polite form is tabe raremasu. Again, tabe raremasu. Now, to change it into a plain form, you have to remove the mass from its mass form, then add rareru. Again, remove the mass of the group 2 verbs, then add rareru to make it a potential verb in a plain form. So, tabemasu will become tabe rareru, which translates to can eat. Again, group 2 verbs, we have tabemasu, to eat. Now, if you want to make it a potential verb in a polite form, it will be tabe raremasu. Removing the mass, then add the raremasu, which means can eat. Now, to be a plain form, to make it a plain form, but still a potential verb, remove the mass, then add rareru, which makes it or transforms it into tabe rareru. Again, can eat. Can you give me, or should I give you another group 2 verb, then translate it into a potential verb? Okay, how about to wake up? Again, to wake up, okimasu. What is the potential verb in the polite form of okimasu? Very well, okirareru. Again, okirareru. Now, even though it ends or the sound before the mass is ki, right? Remember that okimasu is one of those verbs that are under group 2, which are special verbs. How about the potential verb plain form of okimasu? Yes, it's okirareru. Again, okirareru. So, okimasu, to wake up. Potential verb in polite form is okiraremasu. And then the potential verb plain form of okimasu is okirareru. Wakarimashita? Now, let's move on to group 3 verbs. Now, let's start off with kimasu, to come. To make it a potential verb into a polite form, it's special, of course, it's koraremasu. Again, kimasu, potential verb polite form is koraremasu, which means can come. And for plain form, it's korareru, which again means can come. Remember, kimasu, potential verb polite form koraremasu, and then plain form korareru. That's just it. Now let's move on to those who are group 3 verbs that are noun, then we add the shimasu to make it a verb. nouns plus a shimasu to make it a verb. Now for this one, you just have to add dekimasu or change shimasu to dekimasu to make it a polite form, and to make it a plain form, just dekiru. So example, we have, of course, our favorite, benkyo shimasu, to study. Now, if you want to transform it into a potential verb in its polite form, remove the shimasu and add dekimasu. So it will become benkyo dekimasu, or can study. Again, benkyo dekimasu, or can study. Now, if you want to make it a plain form, benkyo dekiru, can study. Benkyo dekiru, can study. Again, benkyo shimasu, which means to study. To become a potential verb, polite form, benkyo dekimasu. And then for a plain form, benkyo dekiru. Magatta? Now, it'll be the same with, for example, if you want to play tennis, no? Tenisu o shimasu, so it will become tenisu dekimasu, tenisu dekiru, which means you can play tennis. Now, how about to clean? It's soji shimasu. And then the potential verb for polite form for soji shimasu is, yes, soji dekimasu. Again, soji dekimasu, or can clean. Now, the plain form of that is soji dekiru. Wakarimashita? Okay, very good, everyone. Now, let's move on. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we move on, wakaru, which includes the meaning of possibility itself, or can understand, does not change into wakareru. Again, wakaru, wakarimasu, alright? It is already a potential or potentiality to understand something. Alright, so wakarimasu will remain as wakarimasu or wakaru. Okay, it doesn't have any potential formation or potential form. It is as it is. Or should we say sonomama? Pagatta? Now, let's move on into using the potential verbs into sentences. Okay? So potential verb express not actions but states as well. Okay? The object of transitive verbs are indicated by the particle o. Now, when they become potential verb, however, since we're stating or saying something that we can do, their objects are usually indicated by the particle ga. Again, when you transform a verb into its potential form and uses it in a sentence with an object, we use the particle ga. Take a look at our example, okay? When you say, I speak Japanese, you say, watashi wa nihongo o hanashimasu. Watashi wa nihongo o hanashimasu. Saying that you speak or I speak Japanese. Now, when you want to state your potential as someone who can speak Japanese, you say, watashi wa nihongo ga hanasemasu. Again, watashi wa nihongo ga hanasemasu. Or, I can speak Japanese. You see the difference between the two sentences? The first one, you're just stating that I speak Japanese. Now, in the second one, you're stating that you can and you have the ability, alright, to speak Japanese, or I can speak Japanese. That's why we use nihongo ga hanasemasu, transforming the hanashimasu into hanasemasu, and then using the particle ga to indicate your object. Wakatta minasan? Wakarimashita? Now, no particles change except for o in a sentence when using a potential verb. Alright, again, you only change the particle o, okay, into ga, while the other particle remains the same. Example, Hitori de byoin e ikemasu ka? Again, hitori de byoin e ikemasu ka? Or can you go to the hospital alone? You're asking someone if they can go to the hospital. So, since we're using ikimasu and transforming it into ikemasu, and we all know that the particle, when we're stating or using the action verb for go, come, to go home, we use the particle e. So, it will remain the same because e means that is the direction of our action. Okay? We do not change e to ga. Okay? It will remain the same. Hitori de byoin e ikemasu ka? Again, hitori de byoin e ikemasu ka? Or can you go to the hospital alone? Another example. Tanaka-san ni aemasen deshita. Again, Tanaka-san ni aemasen deshita. I could not see Mr. Tanaka, or I could not meet Mr. Tanaka. So in this one, we all know that when we use the verb to meet or aimasu, we always use the particle ni, not o. Okay, because we are referring to a person. Now, since aimasu, okay, is a group 1 verb, its potential formation or potential form is aemasu. Now here, we said that we could not see negative, past negative, so we use aemasen deshita. And then, since we're referring to a person, we use the particle ni. Tanaka-san ni aemasen deshita. Ni remains the same. Okay? We do not change it into ga. Only o can be changed into ga. Remember that. Alright? Wakatta ne. Now, keep in mind that potential verbs have 2 uses. First is to express a person's ability to do something, and another one is to express the possibility of an action in a certain situation. Okay, so in our first examples, okay, in our previous examples, we use it to express an ability. Now let's see how to use, or how can we use the potential verb to express a possibility. Example. Mirasan wa kanji ga yomemasu. Mirasan wa kanji ga yomemasu. Or Mr. Miller can read kanji. Okay, that is one of an example where we use the potential verb as an ability to do something. Mirasan wa kanji ga yomemasu. Or Mr. Miller can read kanji. Now, this one. Kono ginko de dora ga kaeraremasu. Again, kono ginko de dora ga kaeraremasu. Or you can change dollars at this bank, which means or which expresses the possibility of an action in a certain situation. Or which means there's a possibility of doing an exchange of $1 in that bank. Kono ginko de dora ga kaeraremasu. You can change dollar at this bank. Wakatta? Now, I want you to learn 2 new verbs. Alright. Yes, it is a verb. Now, let's talk about miemasu and kikoemasu. Again, miemasu and kikoemasu. Isn't it the same with to see and to hear? Let's find out. So the potential verb for mimasu or to see is miraremasu. Alright? Can see, of course. And that for kikimasu is kikemasu. Kikimasu to hear and kikemasu can hear. So this indicates, alright, mimasu and kikimasu or miraremasu and kikemasu indicates one's intention of seeing or listening. Okay? Kikimasu and mimasu indicates one's intention of seeing or listening. Okay? But miemasu indicates that a certain object comes into one's sight, okay, and kikoemasu, a sound reaches one's ear independent of one's will. Again, miemasu indicates that a certain object comes into one's sight, while kikoemasu is when a sound reaches one's ear independent of one's will. Meaning, alright, when you want or when we use miemasu, it means that we saw something despite of wanting to see it or not wanting to see it. Now, when we use kikoemasu, okay, we hear or heard something, okay, regardless if we want to hear it or we don't want to hear it. Wherein miemasu transformed into miraremasu and kikimasu transformed into kikoemasu, meaning we intend to see or hear something. While in miemasu and kikoemasu, okay, regardless of our will, okay, it does comes into view or we heard it. So in sentences, okay, using miemasu and kikoemasu, objects to be seen or heard become the objects of the sentences are indicated by ga. Okay? Again, regardless of your will to see or hear something, we saw and heard it. That's why we use miemasu and kikoemasu. And, okay, the particle to use for this one is ga. So, let's take a look at our examples. Okay, let's compare using miemasu or miraremasu in a potential verb and then the miemasu. Okay. Shinjuku de ima Kurosawa-san no eiga ga miraremasu. Again, Shinjuku de ima Kurosawa-san no eiga ga miraremasu. Or, you can now see Kurosawa's movies in Shinjuku. Now, why did we use miraremasu here? It's because if you want to see Kurosawa-san's movies in Shinjuku, you can. Alright? If you want to. Okay? You can. Okay? You can now see Kurosawa's movies in Shinjuku. Okay? If you don't want, it's okay. Now, if you want, you can see it in Shinjuku. Again, Shinjuku de ima Kurosawa-san no eiga ga miraremasu. Now, let's use miemasu in the second example. Shinkansen kara Fuji-san ga miemasu. Shinkansen kara Fuji-san ga miemasu. Mount Fuji can be seen from the Shinkansen. Now, why did we use miemasu in this sentence? It's because, okay, despite of you not wanting to see Mount Fuji or wanting or can be possibility of seeing Mount Fuji, okay, you can see Mount Fuji when you ride the Shinkansen, regardless if you want or don't want to see the amazing mountain. Okay, regardless of your own will, you will and can see Mount Fuji when you ride the Shinkansen. Okay? That's why Shinkansen kara Fuji-san ga miemasu. Can be seen. Okay? Even if you don't want to. Alright. Now, if we're clear with the difference between miraremasu and miemasu, let's move on to kikemasu and kikoemasu. Now, here's our first example. Denwa de denki hyo ga kikemasu. Again, denwa de tenki hyo ga kikemasu. Or you can hear the weather forecast by phone. Why did we use kikemasu here? It's because if you want to listen or to know the weather forecast, you can listen or you can hear it through your phone. Now, if you don't want to, it's okay. But if you want to, you can use your phone to listen to the weather forecast. That's why it's tenki hyo ga kikemasu. Now, let's see the second example. Radio no oto ga kikoemasu. I'm sorry about the double ga. That's a typographical error. Again, radio no oto ga kikoemasu, or the sound of radio can be heard. Now, why did we use oto ga kikoemasu in this sentence? Can you guess? That's right. It's because you heard the sound of the radio even if you don't want to hear it. For example, you're just reading a book or just doing nothing, and then a sound of the radio comes to you, or you hear it. So that's why we use kikoemasu. Regardless of your own will, wanting it or not wanting to hear it, you heard the sound of a radio. That's why radyo no oto ga kikoemasu, or the sound of a radio can be heard. Is it clear? Wakarimashita? Wakatta ne, minasan.
Alright, that's just it for today. See you on our next videos. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to keep you updated on our lessons so you can master Japanese language in no time.